Welcome to the Washington Heights Church podcast. We're so glad you're here. Each week, we bring you the latest Sunday message filled with God's Word to help strengthen your faith and deepen your walk with Christ. Whether you're tuning in from home, your commute, or anywhere in between, we're thrilled to have you join our community. So, grab a cup of coffee, find a cozy spot, and let's get started.
So let's turn our attention to the message for today, and we've entitled this series, Signs for a Specific Reason. You may know that there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament, 4 eyewitness accounts of the life and times of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And John goes out of his way to say that there were certain things that Jesus did, miracles that Jesus performed, that he referred to as signs. And we began by saying this, that signs look beyond themselves. They're trying to help us understand something. They're trying to communicate something even beyond that event. And so we're making our way through the 7 signs that John recorded for us that not only tell us what Jesus did when he was here, but also help us to understand what it means for us all these years later. So today we're going to talk about the healing at the pool. And I want to begin by really entertaining, this question with us and something for you just to process inside of yourself. Have you ever been stuck on something? Something that you want to get out of your life, something that you want to move beyond, something that is just a recurring theme in your life, and you'd rather not have it. And you want to move on, but you find it really difficult. You find yourself stuck. Well, I heard a story about a man who had a particular affection for donuts in his life. And he decided one day that he wanted to change his diet up and wanted to get away from donuts. And everything went fine for about 2 weeks. But he wakes up one morning, he's having a real struggle. So he's making his way and he knows that his path to work is going to take him by his favorite donut shop. And so he prays the prayer, God, show me a sign. And as I drive by the donut shop today, if there's a spot open right in the front, I'm going to take it as a sign from you that it's okay to have a cheat day. And sure enough, the 8th time around the block, there's a spot right in the front. And I don't know if you've ever experienced the struggle to move beyond something, to get something out of your life, but we're going to talk about that issue, that dynamic today as we talk about the healing at the pool. And so this story takes place in a context where I think this whole issue of stuckness makes its way present. And I was wondering, what kind of issues do we find, that we struggle with today? And I made just a short list of things maybe that have been a part of our lives or marked our lives for seasons or years or sometimes decades, resentment. And I've tried to get beyond that, but it just kind of creeps back in, and I have the best of intentions to move on the other side of that, but it comes back. Debt, we've kind of spent our way into a negative position there, and it just never seems like we can get ourselves in a positive side of that whole ledger. A dead-end career, we just continue where we are. There's an unsolvable conflict, a hard-to-break habit, or maybe just a flat-out addiction. And we wonder, how do we get unstuck? How do we get beyond those things? So let's jump into this story, and we're going to see some dynamics. First, we're going to talk about the story, and then we'll talk about us that help us to think about how to get unstuck. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, that seems like one of these throwaway sort of details here, but there's an important part that's going to play into this story. The first 2 signs that we've looked at that Jesus performed were performed in a region called Cana. And here's a very simple map. Cana's up near the top of that, and this is where Jesus was born, where he was from, and I'll tell you, it was a cosmopolitan area. There was ethnic diversity, there was cultural diversity, there was a little bit more of a relaxed take on walking even with the God of the Bible. What does that look like? But now Jesus is going to go from Cana, where he's done those first 2 signs, all the way down to the bottom of that map to Jerusalem. And this is a place that's a little more strict and sometimes even a little bit more legalistic of understanding what God has revealed to us and what it means to walk with God. And that fact is going to play into this story. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. Now, again, John throws in a whole bunch of details. And what this helps us to understand, and I feel, we need to mention this many times over because we might fall into the trap of thinking, well, the Bible was just these made-up stories that people created to teach us spiritual truths, but these are not, once upon a time, here's what happened, and there's one moral lesson. These are real events that took place in real time and included real people. But as people looked at John's detail here, they said, you know what? We haven't found anything like that in this part of the world where this takes place. So the fact that he mentions a 5-roof colonnade means that he's made up this story, and it's really not a true story. It's meant to teach us some sort of lesson. And for a long time, many people thought this place just didn't exist. That is, until they found it. And they found it in the basement of a church and really underneath it, because sometimes in history things are built on top of each other and found in layers. And sure enough, all the way down at the basement level of this church, there was this pool. And they found it laid out in a pattern that looked like this. Each of these areas here, each of these squares is about the size of half a football field. And so there's 4 sides all the way around, and then what do you know? One right down the middle, a 5-sided colonnade. And so what John records for us, for a long time, people say, well, I've never found anything, until they did. And so this is a true story with real people. And so as you see these steps down here below that ladder, those are the actual steps that people tried to walk down in the story that we're going to unpack here in a minute. And laying around that area were a whole bunch of people who needed help. Check this out. In these, and really on these colonnades, in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. Now, we need to know from our perspective today, life wasn't the same back then as it is today. If you were disabled in one way or another, life was hard. And there was not social structure there to help you. Maybe you could lean on your family, and maybe you couldn't if they were living day to day. And many of these people were on their own. And what being on your own meant is begging so that you could survive from one day to another. But there's a whole bunch of people lying around this pool. Why is that? Why are they gathered there? Well, the reason is a legend grew up around that pool. And the legend goes this way, that from time to time, an angel would come down, stir the water in the pool a little bit, and the first person to make it into the water would be healed of whatever disability they had. And I don't know what that pictures for you, but it seems like you just have desperate people who are hoping against hope about something that's a story and sounds like a little bit of a legend, but you know what? I've tried everything else, and what do I have to lose? Archaeology has also told us something else, that what happened in that pool is actually an Asclepion. And I don't know about you, that's a new word for me that I found out just recently. What is an Asclepion? Well, Asclepius is the Roman god of healing. And so this place really turns out to be a shrine to the Roman god of healing, and you get this syncretistic idea that a whole bunch of different beliefs and faiths are combined into one thing, and you've got people who are looking for a new lease on life and going to this place where who knows what happens, but what do I have to lose? But I got to tell you, there's something sinister that's happening in the background of this story. And there are some people who have referred to this pool as a cruel pool. And here's why. Asclepius is a god in the Roman mythology who would, bring about healing for various parts of the body. And what they found at the bottom of that pool in the picture that you saw was actually these clay models of body parts. And here are just legs and feet, but you know what? There are even shelves that they've found that are much more diverse than that. You find all kinds of different body parts that were there. And so when you showed up at this pool, you would pay your money because it wasn't free. You would take the body part that you found, a disability, and you threw that into the water in the hopes that it would produce some healing. And so you find that there have been people for a long, long time who have sought to find, a new lease on life. And the picture of some desperate people lying around the edge of this pool, maybe looking for that water to stir. But do you know what else archaeology found? Is that the water did stir, but it wasn't an angel from heaven. They found some piping that leads into the bottom of this pool. And do you know where the piping originates? Where the religious leaders resided. And so from time to time, the stirring of the water was manufactured by people. Let me put this another way. This was a scam. This was people, even religious people, taking advantage of desperate people. And that is nothing new to our day and our age. And there's somebody in this story who's lying there, and we don't know what he understands about all of this, but we do know that he is desperate, lying by the cruel pool. And the pool is located very close to the Temple Mount. The pools are right up there at the top, and they're just a few yards away from where the temple resides. And even that is a bit of a cruel thing, because you can see it from there. You can see the Temple Mount from the pools where you're hoping to be the first one into the water. And the reason this is important is because the people who are at the pool, they could never go to the Temple Mount. There was a restriction there. Let me show you where that comes from. This is back in Leviticus. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near, a man blind or lame. Now let me tell you what this is all about and the way that it originated. This was referring only to the priests, those who would go before God and offer sacrifice on behalf of the people. And the intention was, to just show clarity of mind, body, and spirit and all of it. But it was reserved just for a few people. But by Jesus' day, these words had now been applied to everybody. And so if you had any kind of issue, you could not go to the Temple Mount. You could not honor God in that way. You could not offer your sacrifice. And so here they are, within sight of it, understanding the barrier that exists between them, hoping against hope that there would be some sort of solution, some sort of healing. One man was there who had been an invalid for how many years? 38 years. That is a long time. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now the word healed there, it has this rich meaning that it actually has this idea of being made whole. And do you see the irony even in Jesus' question? Of being made whole in a place where there are these dismembered body parts that have been thrown into the pool in the hopes that it would make somebody well. And Jesus simply says, forget about that clay stuff. Do you want to be made whole? And it's an interesting question that we're going to unpack in a little bit. But Jesus shows up at a place where people have been sitting sometimes for a long time, maybe even stuck there. And what's implied in his question, I think, is really important about change. Because when we think about our lives changing, we might often think, well, that's going to bring a subtraction. If I change, I'm going to lose something. And I'm going to have to give something away. I'm going to have to give something up. But Jesus talks about the change that is offered with him is actually a positive thing. That it's an addition. It's being made whole. And it's not just losing something, not just taking something away, but it's actually adding something and helping us move toward wholeness. And so Jesus says to him and asks him the question, "Do you want to be healed?" Here's his response. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am going, another steps down before me." I'm a lame person trying to win a track meet. And it just has never worked for me. And it is just impossible for me to do that. And you talk about cruel, right? Even when the water stirred and the people hoped against hope that they would be the one who would get in there first so that they could be healed, who would make it? Somebody who's got a lame leg? No, probably somebody who's got an ingrown toenail, right? Is going to be the first one in there. But for many of the others, it was impossible. And so we picture this guy in a painting that has been created in this moment. And there's a picture, right, of somebody. How is he ever going to win a foot race into the pool? But also at the same time, there's a hand reaching down to him. A hand that offers him a different option than the one that he has been trying to do for 38 years. So Jesus says to the man, get up, take your bed, and walk. And the word walk actually has this idea of keep walking. The tense in which this is put is take one step and then another step and then another step after that, and keep taking those steps that lead you away from this place. And what happened? At once the man was healed. He took up his bed and he walked. So what does this have to do with us? So let's talk about us for a minute, especially those of us who have been stuck in one way or another for a long period of time. How does this story help, and how does it relate to issues that we might be facing that may be similar, but maybe often are very dissimilar even from this story? I think number one, we've got to be willing to admit that what I'm doing isn't working. Here's somebody who's been in the same place, as far as we can infer from the story, for 38 years, and it has never gotten him to the place even that he wanted to be. And so he has to conclude, you know what, maybe I need some options that are beyond what I've been trying. And I wonder how many of us maybe need to admit the same thing. I don't know if you're familiar with this show. I catch it every once in a while. It's called Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil is psychologist, psychiatrist, life coach, and guests are invited in the show, and many times they have relational problems or addiction problems, things like that. And he'll say, tell me about the issue. And they'll say, well, especially when it's a couple thing, it'll go something like this. Well, I've talked to my wife and I've told her, the way that it should be and the way that she needs to be. And, she just won't listen to me. And if she would just listen to me, everything would be better. And inside of, somebody's own mind, that all makes sense. And at the end of that long and winding explanation, Dr. Phil will often ask this question, how's that working for you? And the answer clearly is, not that well. You're on the Dr. Phil show talking about your issues in front of the entire nation. But I wonder how many times we conclude, I got this thing figured out. It's just that they won't do what they're supposed to do. And maybe we need to admit that what we're doing isn't working. And maybe we've got another issue in our life and we need to admit the same thing. Every addict that I've ever talked to, and again, this is an issue that I've wrestled with in my own life, who has wrestled with alcohol, will say something like this: I can quit anytime I want to. And yet the reality is that issue tends to stay there. So maybe we need to admit that what we're doing isn't working. And we need to try something else, something different. And if we've been trying the same thing over and over again, and if they would finally listen to me, or if I could just, get enough willpower together, maybe we need to understand, and you probably heard this before, the definition of insanity in 12 steps, trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And if we've been stuck there for 38 years, or maybe 8 years, or however long it has been, maybe it's time to admit, what I've been doing isn't working, because I'm in the same place, or I find myself right back in the same place that I was. And so maybe it's time to try something different. Secondly, we have to honestly ask the question, do I want to be made whole? Right? That's the question that Jesus asked this man. And I'll be honest with you, for a long time, that question seemed silly to me. Right? You go to somebody who's having a hard time and say, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be made whole? I've gone to see people in hospitals, for a couple decades, and I got to be, honest with you in saying I've never asked that question because it seems so self-explanatory. Who would ever say no to that? But I've come to see the genius in Jesus' question. Do you want to be put together? And I fear that sometimes, and I'll speak from a little bit of my own experience, but also what I've interacted with others? Could it be that sometimes I don't truly want to be made whole? I just want enough of God's power, enough of God's presence, enough of God's healing so that I can manage this thing, because after all, that got me into trouble and I don't want to get in trouble again, but I have no desire really at my heart and soul to truly give that up. But God, would you make me whole enough so that I can manage this well and not get in trouble again, not get another DUI, not get another spouse who's saying, hey, I can't do this if that's what you're going to be doing? God, could you just help me get well enough so that I can continue on, but I don't want to let go of what I'm holding on to? What seems like such an obvious question is a question of genius. There are obvious questions, like, are the Cowboys going to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers tonight? That's silly. Of course they're going to win. Tom Brady, that guy hasn't accomplished anything in his career, has he? It's going to be an easy one. But this is a question of genius that gets to the real root of the matter. Do I truly want to change? And that's a harder question to answer than we often think that it is. Why wouldn't we want to be made whole? Who would ever, say anything short of that? I think there's some good reasons why. Now, again, they're good in the sense that they are, influential, but they hold us back sometimes from truly finding healing. I think it can be because it's familiar. And one of the sad dynamics that I've seen over and over again in my years of doing what I do is someone exits an abusive, painful relationship and then winds up in another one that's just like it, and in another one that's just like it after that. And I think, why? Could it be because it's familiar? It's not great, but it's what I know. But sometimes God wants to take us beyond what we know to something that is so much better and something that makes us whole. Maybe we think that it's our identity. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to put a blank in there and you can fill it in for yourself with sort of a negative trait that might describe you, and just keep this to yourself here. But if you were to say, it's just like me to be blank, what would you put in there? It's just like me to worry. That's just who I am. That's just what I do. It's just like me to drink too much. It's just like me not to be able to control my anger. That's just who I am. But let me tell you, you are not your struggle. You are not your sin. You are not your trauma. It is not our identity, and it is not how God views us, but sometimes it's how we view ourselves. And could it be that it even becomes an excuse for failure? Because we just think, well, that's just the natural part of who I am. Why wouldn't we not want to be made whole? It's so discouraging. Maybe you've been working on it for a long, long time and you just don't see any success, so after a while you just give up, throw our hands up and say, well, it's just the way that it's going to be. And we just have no hope that comes along with it. And maybe, strangely, it rewards me. There are commentators speaking about this story that we're looking at who are saying, what is it that would actually reward, somebody who is disabled by this pool? But remember, he's been in that condition 38 years. He's been surviving for 38 years. Could it be that actually begging for an existence has proven successful, and the possibility of being on the other side of that could bring this unprecedented, unknown, new life where I need to get a job I haven't worked in a long time? Is that going to be enough? This has been working. It's been rewarding me. It's been paying off. And in one way or another, the things that we do, and even the addictions that we host, could maybe help us escape reality for a time, and that's a reward. But in the bigger picture, it is certainly not wholeness. And so could it be any one of these reasons, or maybe a combination of those, that would make us stop short of wanting to be made whole? And I love part of the 12-step thing, and I joined that group on Tuesday nights of Celebrate Recovery. Here's one of the steps in that whole process. We were entirely ready to have God remove these character defects. But I wonder if sometimes we're at the point of saying, I don't want it totally gone. I just want enough so that I can control it, so that I can manage it, so that I can live with it, so that I don't get in trouble with it. And yet Jesus comes one day to a man and says, do you want to be made whole? So principles of freedom. Freely admit that what I'm doing isn't working. Honestly ask, do I want to be made whole? And third, wholeheartedly act. What did Jesus say? Stand up, take action. Could it be instead of saying I can quit anytime I want, it's time to empty out the alcohol closet? Could it be that instead of, just waiting for them to finally understand that the way that I have mapped this out is right and they just won't do what they're supposed to do, maybe it's time to reach out to that counselor. And maybe it's time to make an appointment. Maybe instead of saying, I'm just going to renew my effort not to spend my way into all kinds of debt, maybe it's time to cut up some credit cards. Maybe it's time to put some filters on some devices that can keep us from getting onto certain websites. Stand up, take action. He said, take up your mat. All of a sudden, this guy's got a new relationship with his mat. It used to be his bed. Now it's something that he carries. And so there's an opportunity for us to have a whole new relationship with our past and put that in the past. And he says, and walk. Take the steps in that direction. Take the steps forward that lead you to a whole different place. And what happened on that day at once? The man was healed and he took up his bed and he walked. He took action. He broke with his past and he began to take the steps in the direction that led him out of that place to a whole new kind of life that was given to him by the God who has reached down his hand into a broken world and asks us today still, do you want to be made whole? And yet it can be a difficult choice that we make in that place for all kinds of different reasons. So let me wrap this up by asking you this question. What can I do today that will take me forward to a better tomorrow? What's the action that you can take? What's the past with which you can break? And what are the steps that will lead you toward wholeness, a whole new kind of life? Live together with the God who has reached down his hand to a broken world still and invite you to come. Would you bow your heads together with me? Lord Jesus, thank you for who you are and for the grace that you extend to us. And God, for us on a human level, change is hard. But God, I pray that we would learn increasingly to trust you, that where you're leading us is good, is for our benefit, that you have our best intentions at heart, that you want us to be fully alive, even in a broken world like ours. We can live life under your direction, with your power, with the transformation that comes from you and not from within ourselves. And God, help us to long for that. And as we see the heart of Jesus in full display, may our trust in you only grow. And may that allow us to take the steps that we need to when it gets scary. And we pray that we might see your hand reaching down to us. And you know our condition. You know everything about us. And you ask us, do you want to be made whole? God, may we pursue that together with you, walking humbly with our God who has come to our rescue. And maybe even, God, the first step in that journey is putting hope and trust in you for the very first time, realizing that you came to rescue us, to do for us what we could not do for ourselves, to live the life we could never live as hard as we try, to lay it down as a sacrifice on our behalf, you standing in our place and rising again from the dead to conquer sin and death once and for all. May we know that our hope is in you and in you alone. So lead us in the direction that draws us closer to you and that helps us to understand more of what you have in store for us of a life lived together on a journey with our great God. We ask and pray all of this in Jesus' name.
We hope you enjoyed today's message. If you found this sermon meaningful, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more people and spread the word. Stay connected with us throughout the week by following us on social media at Washington Heights Church on Facebook and Instagram, and by visiting our website at whc.faith. For more information and additional resources, check out the podcast description below. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.